Welcome to Worship with Eliot Unitarian Chapel. Wherever you are tuning in from near or far, we are so glad that you're here. I am Eliot's lead minister, the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I hope that this is a service that nurtures your spirit. If you are new to Eliot Chapel, we are an intentional community that welcomes all races, all genders, and all sexual orientations. We welcome people of all creeds and beliefs, all economic circumstances, and all types of families. Our vision is to create a just world through vibrant, beloved community. If you would like to connect with us and learn more about our congregation, please look for information at the end of the service. Welcome to Eliot Chapel.
Here we have come into this sacred space, quieter now with our readiness. Hushed voices, hoping, trusting for so many things. For connection, for communion, for inspiration, for information, for healing, for wholeness, for words, for music, for celebration and consolation. Here we have come into this space bringing all of who we are. Let us be willing, however we are changed.
In Unitarian Universalism, we light a chalice to signify that we have entered sacred space and have prepared our hearts to give and receive the blessing of beloved community.
At this hour, many of our sibling Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting a flaming chalice.
As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are part of a great community of faith.
May these dancing flames inspire us to fill our lives with the Unitarian Universalist ideals of love, justice, and truth.
Church that is to be, old bondage not
Our Time for All Ages is a story called Honoring Fallen Soldiers by Erica Hewitt and Paul Sawyer. Think of where you feel safe and at peace. What's the signal that tells you it's okay to be at peace? For people in the United States military, there's a special signal that says you're okay and you're at peace. It's a melody called taps, and it's only 24 notes long. It was composed by a general in the Civil War and his bugler. It's hard to remember how important bugle calls were in the military once upon a time. In days before radio and telephones, bugle calls were the only way military units could communicate to groups over a large area. In the 1860s, the end of the day was important. If there was time and peace enough to play taps, that was a signal that the camp was relatively safe. It meant that you were not under attack. It meant that there were no enemy soldiers to worry about. To a camp of soldiers, the note of taps meant that unless you were on duty, you could close your eyes and sleep in peace. They say that the first time taps was played at a service for fallen soldiers also took place during the Civil War. In those days, the traditionary military salute was, as it still is, the firing of a 3-round volley of rifles. But this one time, they say, was after a long battle, when finally a ceasefire had been called and both sides had stopped to bury their dead. In one camp, as the work ended and the memorial service began to take place, the soldiers knew that sounding the artillery salute might be taken as a return to fighting and not as a sacred memorial. Someone had the idea of sounding a bugle, and that sound would never be taken as an aggressive act of war. Taps came to mean the same thing. It meant the safe and quiet end to the day. Time to rest, time to turn the lights out, to let their eyes close, and as best they could, to be at peace. That's what taps means. It's like a powerful prayer. Let's listen to it. This weekend, many people in the U.S. are remembering and honoring all those who have died while serving our military. So you might hear taps again. If you do, maybe you can stop what you're doing and think of every soldier who might have been afraid, and then let taps remind you that they are now at peace. I invite you to join with me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Make sure you're seated comfortably, feet on the floor if you can, hands and arms in a comfortable position so that you can center and focus for today's Memorial Day prayer. Spirit of life, whom we have called by many names in thanksgiving and in anguish, bless the poets and those who mourn. Send peace for the soldiers who did not make the wars, but whose lives were consumed by them. Let strong trees grow above graves far from home. Breathe through the arms of their branches. The earth will swallow your tears while the dead sing, "No more, Never again. Remember me. For the wounded ones and those who received them back, let there be someone ready when the memories come, when the scars pull and the buried metal moves, and forgiveness for those of us who were not there for our ignorance. And in us, veterans of a forest of 1,000 fallen promises, let new leaves of protest grow on our stumps. Give us courage to answer the cry of humanity's pain. And with our bare hands, out of full hearts, with our intelligence, let us create the peace. I would invite you to speak the names of loved ones who have served in war, who have fallen in war, and those family members who are left to grieve the emptiness and the loss. May those we have named be held in the warmth of community and know they are not alone. Amen, and blessed be. One of the traditions here at Eliot Chapel that we really treasure is the tradition of giving away half of our offering every Sunday to an organization in the community that is working to put values that we treasure into action, to make them real. And this month, the organization we've chosen is Metropolitan Congregations United, of which we are a member congregation. Metropolitan Congregations United puts faith into action by developing leaders who move their congregations, organizations, and communities to change public policy for the common good. The leadership of Metropolitan's congregation is diverse and exceptional. One of the issues they've been working on really hard, for instance, is to take down the school to prison pipeline. African American children in our community are much more likely to end up in juvenile detention, much more likely to end up in prison. And this process starts in their schools. And so we have been working in partnership with Metropolitan Congregations United to end this. It has to stop. It has to stop damaging our community and damaging our families. Just to give you a little taste of how things are done at Metropolitan Congregations United, I've got a little snippet of their last annual meeting.
The goal of this meeting is to remind us as we live through this historic confluence of COVID-19 and American racism, that the work we're doing to protect the right to vote and to ensure participation in an equitable democratic process is indeed sacred work, worthy of our lives. Even now, the highest offices in this state and in this country are determined, and we can see it almost wherever we look, to show us that Black life will only matter as a means to white supremacist progress. We are gathered today to reject this lie. We've come together because even now, the voice of the divine urges us to press on for freedom and justice. I thought that we should first acknowledge that we're pressing on right now in the work of freedom and justice in a historically difficult moment. We're organizing, y'all, for change and resisting state oppression in the midst of a global pandemic. And that pandemic is taxing our social and emotional resources in ways that are unprecedented. And so as we open, I just want to invite us to be mindful of our breath this afternoon. In moments like these, it's crucial for us to be honest with ourselves and others about how we are doing and how we are feeling, even if we don't have time for lengthy exchanges on this call. It's crucial that we're honest with ourselves and that we prioritize self-care, because one of the trademarks of white supremacy is allowing humans to labor and suffer with little to no acknowledgement. And so we resist that. Friends, in this moment, as we gather to press on, it is okay if you find yourself laboring with significantly less fuel. It is okay if you're finding yourself in need of more or new or different kinds of rest so that you can show up to work in whole and healthy ways. Family, it is okay. It is even okay to not be okay right now. It's okay if you're finding yourself at the end of your wits or with your faith seeming to waver. Regardless of how you are feeling right now, it is okay, and you are not alone. You are invited. We are invited to be fully here, just as we are.
So what we see in this section is that not only does Metropolitan Congregations United push forward, but it also takes care of the people who are leading, who are organizing, who are emptying their hearts into the issues that matter so much to them. Our goal this month is to raise $1,300 through our shared plate, with $650 going to MCU and $650 going to Eliot Chapel's many life-sustaining ministries. Let us be a generous people. Years ago, on a sultry southern Louisiana Friday morning, the last of 4 Confederate monuments was taken down in the city of New Orleans. Hundreds gathered to witness, and the crowd was divided, a no man's land between them. The larger groups celebrated, sang, cheered, and danced because in their experience, the monument of General Robert E. Lee, which is the last monument to be taken down, erased the true history of the Civil War. It erased their history, and it erased slavery as the reason for the Confederate cause, replacing it with chivalry, loyalty, honor, heritage, and pride. In the months leading up to that day, Black New Orleanians spoke about driving day after day by these symbols of the Confederacy, honoring those who had fought to keep their ancestors enslaved. They spoke about the toll it took. They talk about the psychological toll it took. And there was no doubt that the monuments needed to be taken down. Now, the smaller group, all white, had been fighting to keep those monuments up. And they stood mostly silent, angry and bitter, anchored in the mythology of a lost golden age. It had taken 2 years of organizing to get these monuments taken down. And the bitterness, the competing loyalties, the different versions of history display the divisions of race and power that rule this country. New Orleans Mayor Landrieu emphasized the power of symbols to support or take down systems of oppression, while emphasizing that removing symbols should never be confused with the real work. And you might be asking, what could this possibly have to do with Memorial Day? It actually has a whole lot to do with Memorial Day. Memorial Day began as a Southern observance, and there are many stories about how it started. And one of these stories features Charlottesville, Virginia Confederate women going to the graves of their fallen soldiers, husbands, fathers, sons, uncles, and laying flowers. And then they laid flowers on Union graves. And the practice grew, spreading north. And Union women went to the graves of their husbands, fathers, sons, uncles, and then laid flowers on Confederate graves. Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day because of decorating graves. And it became a way to foster unity in a country that was terribly divided. Everyone could grieve together the hundreds of thousands of lives lost. In unity, they held up that every soldier who died left behind a grieving family. And it is certainly true that every soldier who died had years of living and loving stolen from them, and their death broke the hearts of those who still lived and now had to find a way to keep living. It is also true that this unity was sought by white America, Union and Confederate, by pushing back the overarching reason for the war and raising up that soldiers on both sides died serving their country, serving a noble cause. And it supported the rewriting of history happening south of the Mason-Dixon line. The history of Memorial Day is one more example of how we have minimized the suffering of people of color in the search for unity. So there's a connection between Memorial Day and those Confederate monuments. North and South both whitewashed the true reason for the war in the pursuit of unity, which is that the South seceded from the Union to protect their right to own slaves. And this positioned the white South to be able to rewrite their loss as a tragedy with themselves as a deposed gentlemen of a lost cause while simultaneously establishing the Jim Crow era. And the white North said nothing, did nothing, believing it had done its duty by ending slavery. So why raise all this on a weekend that is known as the beginning of summer? The kids are out of school. Vacation is here. Hordes of us are taking to the great outdoors, and some of us are getting the best deals on mattresses and appliances. It's time for barbecues, family, and sunshine. So why go there? Why go to this difficult story? Well, this is why. As Unitarian Universalists, we are a people committed to integrity and truth-telling. We often say that the truth sets us free. Unitarian Universalism values doubt and questioning as spiritual practices that lead us towards truth. There is very little that cannot be questioned, except that we hold compassion and freedom as the essence of being human, and that we must live at all times with respect for that radical interconnectedness of all things which we are a part of. Everything else is up for questioning. Otherwise, we turn too much stuff into idols, worshiping what is transient, what is illusionary, rather than what endures. So this resistance to dogmas, to creeds, to idols, and our commitment to truth as a path to freedom creates a healthy questioning towards anything that we are asked to simply accept. Now, I have experienced, and you may have as well, depending on how long you've been within a Unitarian Universalist community, that among American Unitarian Universalists, some of us have a complicated relationship with patriotism and with the military, which in this country are often merged into one thing. And this complicated relationship started in the 1950s during McCarthyism, when Senator Joe McCarthy whipped up what has been called the Red Scare, the fear that communism was infiltrating America. There was great pressure on those who worked in universities and identified as liberal to prove that they weren't communist by signing a loyalty oath. Many Unitarians and Universalists worked in education, so we were strongly impacted by the Red Scare, and our questioning selves meant that we often were on the radar of people who were suspected as being more vulnerable to communism. Now, some Unitarians and Universalists refused to sign the loyalty oath and lost their jobs. Others left the country. In fact, Canadian Unitarian Universalist congregations grew at this time because so many American UUs moved north rather than sign the loyalty oath. So the seed of distrust of patriotism was planted in our faith at that time. And then came the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And for many Unitarian Universalists, this hardened their view that our military was being used for political reasons rather than for justice and lasting peace. In recent decades, we have witnessed respect for the military being raised almost to a religious conviction, and patriotism as its fiercest expression. And this fierce patriotism has been used to harden people against each other. And there is tremendous social pressure to adopt a patriotism rooted in American exceptionalism, which disrespects other nations and peoples by loudly trumpeting American superiority. This kind of patriotism is not consistent with Unitarian Universalist values. It is not rooted in a deep compassion for all of life. So some of us don't know what to do with Memorial Day because it seems to elevate this welding of patriotism and an ideological reverence for the military. So it's way easier to just go to the beach, have the family over for a barbecue, and go shopping for those incredible Memorial Day sales. But, that's not really who we are, because we are the people who go deep. We are the people who engage, who question, and who probe deeply, and who search for truth and wisdom at all times. So really, Memorial Day is a time for us to anchor in our Unitarian Universalist values and to ask the questions that we're already thinking about. What does it mean to love a country? How do we honor those who die in battle? When many of us, even those of us who have served, often have strong doubts about how our military is used. And we deeply question the ability of military force to create true peace and justice. So in the interest of full disclosure, let me say where I am coming from when I ask these questions. I was raised Mennonite, which is a form of Anabaptist Protestantism, and Anabaptism emerged in the early 1500s in Europe, and one of its markers was pacifism. Early Mennonites had a two kingdoms theology. There was God's kingdom and the earthly kingdom, and there was no doubt which kingdom you were supposed to belong to. So Mennonites have historically refused to serve in the military. In fact, many American Mennonites spent World War II in incarceration and in labor camps because they refused to fight. Some conservative Mennonites refuse to pay taxes and won't sign up for Social Security or Medicare. In the Mennonite faith, it is frowned upon to love a country. Patriotism is a sin against God. So you will never see a national flag on the grounds or in the building of a Mennonite church. For some Mennonites, pledging allegiance to a flag or putting your hand over your heart to sing the national anthem is idolatry. Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and Remembrance Day are not recognized in any way. In fact, in our church services, it is as if they do not exist, as if they never happen. Now, while I am no longer a practicing Mennonite, the teachings are in me, and I have brought them into my Unitarian Universalist faith. I continue to be very suspicious about the use of military force and the motives for using it. I am very cautious about my patriotism. There is no nation higher than our core values of compassion and freedom. No nation has the right to demand blind allegiance, to define what allegiance is, or expect us to betray our values in the name of allegiance. And yet, when I began serving Unitarian Universalist congregations, there were always veterans in my congregations or those who worked in the defense industry. Here in St. Louis, we have Boeing, and before that, McDonnell Douglas. We have a large Department of Defense base just across the river in Illinois. This means that pledges from income earned in the defense industry are paying part of my salary. What does that mean? In Quincy, Illinois, where I served just before coming here to serve you, 25% of the congregation were either veterans or the families of veterans. All who have served in combat had PTSD and had struggled their whole lives to feel whole. Some have lifelong disabilities because of being wounded or because of participating in chemical warfare. Their families have been deeply shaped by this experience, and yet all of them are also deeply patriotic. So I've had to ask myself over and over again, what does it mean to love a country? How do we honor those who serve and those who die in battle, while also honoring our own convictions? I want to tell you about a man whose journey offers a path into these dilemmas. Bob is a beloved member of the Unitarian Church of Quincy, where I did serve for 5 years. I visited Bob almost every time I was in Quincy. He's a Marine. He served 2 tours in Vietnam as a staff sergeant, leading his troops deep into battle. Bob always wears his Vietnam vet cap and his Marine jacket. He runs the War Museum at the Illinois Veterans Home. His whole identity is shaped by being a veteran. Bob also believes that the war was an abuse of American power. He believes we had no right being in Korea or Vietnam. He is haunted by memories, burdened by the deaths of those he killed, the deaths he witnessed. He speaks of the abuses committed by his troops. He struggles with how his valuing of human life changed while he served. Vietnam is the raw matter of his life, woven into a complex tapestry of pride and regrets. Bob returned from Vietnam a different man, but he continued to live his life. He served as a police chief, a CIA officer, and a professor of criminology. This experience led him to conclude that our government and law enforcement is completely corrupt, and he continuously struggles to find the good in humanity. And yet, he also strongly identifies as a Unitarian Universalist. He comes to worship every Sunday wearing his Vietnam vet cap and his Marine jacket. Despite his cynicism about human nature, he is loyal to a religious community that celebrates the human spirit and promises itself to compassion, justice, and truth. Bob is kind and generous to those he invites into his circle, and he invited me into his circle. You are always well-fed in his home and feel like you are treasured. What I learned from knowing Bob is that it is a shallow thing to honor those who served and be silent about the goals of the combat, the reason they were in war. To raise up Bob as a hero erases his moral struggle and the truth that thousands of Americans and Vietnamese died because America flexed its muscle and couldn't figure out how to stop flexing it. This is the thing that I have learned, both from anchoring in my own convictions and from loving people like Bob and all the people in our congregations who have served and are serving. Military might cannot create peace, freedom, and democracy. It cannot end ethnic hatred or racism. Otherwise, racism would have ended with the Civil War. Military might can achieve strategic goals. It can provide a container for change by tamping down violence and the threat of violence, while the real justice happens in relationships of equals, in council chambers, at kitchen tables, in voting booths, in workplaces and schools, in our friendships, and in our congregations. So let's go back to those Confederate monuments which attempted to honor those who fought the Confederate side by erasing the truth of their motives. Let's remember that this is the original context for our modern Memorial Day celebrations, which hold up the sacrifice of those who died in battle without holding up the reason why the South seceded from the Union. I propose that we continue to hold the utmost compassion for all who lost their lives in war, and that the magnitude of the loss escalates when those lives were lost pursuing objectives that defy compassion, virtue, and equity. To be a compassionate people means to center the voices of those most impacted by the objectives of the war. Think of those Confederate monuments whose story should be centered. Whose story should be centered? The Confederate soldiers who died protecting slavery, or African Americans who have been held in the terror of slavery, who resisted their slavery, and who continue to fight for freedom and justice for all? This, I propose, is a different kind of patriotism, a different kind of love for country, a different kind of compassion for those who serve. It is a different kind of patriotism, which calls in rather than separates and divides, which carries us into paradox rather than a simplistic unity that erases suffering and equality. This is perhaps part of the truth that will set us free. So if you've lost someone in war, our hearts are with you. If you are currently serving our military, our hearts are with you. If you continuously question patriotism and question the value of military might, our hearts are with you. Our hearts are with you all. This is perhaps part of the truth that will set us free and help us to claim and witness justice for all people. Love to you all. Amen, and blessed be.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean. and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Love to you all.